Matthew 20, and we'll start in verse 1. Matthew 20, verse 1. And of course, we need context, so we're going to back up a little bit to verse 28. Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake, will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many of you who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." Why do you think Jesus would say something like that, knowing what we know about the apostles?
Messing with us?
Back up to verse 25. Talking about the rich young man who wants to justify himself. What do I need to do? Jesus says, just go sell it all and come follow me. And he goes away unhappy. And Jesus, or the disciples, are witnessing this, and they were greatly astonished, and they said, "Then who can be saved?" And Jesus looked at them and said, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." And Peter said, "We have left everything to follow you. What will there be for us?" All right, so Peter's wanting to nail it down and say, we want to know what our reward is going to be. So Jesus says, when the kingdom comes, there's thrones for you, there's a place for you, everything is going to be taken care of, but many who are the last will be first, and many who are first will be last. So that's the preamble to this parable that starts in Matthew chapter 20.
Whereabouts?
Matthew chapter 20.
You started on time tonight.
Did I?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Starting on time is confusing for us. Chapter 20, verse 1. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." Then when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I give you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I'm generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. So again, if this is all the same occasion, this is growing out of a rich young man who couldn't give up on his wealth to follow Jesus. Peter saying, "Well, if we've got to just give up everything to follow you, then what do we get?" That describes us, we, the disciples. We've given up everything to follow you. What's our reward? And he says, many who are the first will be last, and many who are the last will be first. And then he describes all of these possible gifts, rewards that the disciples would receive. Now let's look at a couple of things. I didn't count them, but several times it identifies the workplace. Where is the workplace? In the vineyard, right? And he says it over and over. He doesn't say it the place he sent the workers. He doesn't say out to his fields. It's the vineyard, the vineyard, the vineyard, the vineyard, over and over, all throughout the hiring process in particularly. Is that important? When you see Jesus talking about the vineyard, does that have an equivalent in your mind?
That's where all the food's grown.
Okay, that's where all the food comes from.
I'm the vine, you're the branches.
All right, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Talking to the disciples over in John, he uses that discussion. It's almost always has something to do with the kingdom. Right? There's a king who plants a vineyard, and he builds a wall around it, and he builds a tower in it, and he lends it out. And the people that are supposed to give him what belongs to him from the vineyard don't. Right? He'll tell that parable later. So just about every time you see vineyard and kingdom are equivalent. So a lot of times it's a king who's doing whatever's getting done, and sometimes it's the vineyard, but it's always about the kingdom. So that helps us understand a little bit more about what's going on. Peter's question is, we've given up everything to follow you. Now what do we get? And Jesus says, well, you'll have 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes. Everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or fathers or mothers or a wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much. So he makes some promises about what's going to happen when he comes in his kingdom, and then he tells this story about the vineyard. Gotcha. Well, look at the time frames when he hires people. And your translation may have something slightly different than what the NIV has. The NIV has...
I apologize. I'm sorry I brought that
You're
up.
fine. The NIV has early in the morning, and then again he goes out at 9 in the morning, then again at noon, 3 in the afternoon, and finally at 5 in the afternoon. That's what the NIV has. Do y'all have third hour of the day, 6th hour of the day, 9th hour of the day? Yeah. They started counting at 6 a.m. So this first bunch, when he went out early in the morning and hired these people, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. So they're going to work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. They've put in a big day's work. They claim that they bore the heat of the day. So whatever time of the year this is happening, they were under the heat. They worked a really long, full day. The people that he hired at 5 o'clock in the evening worked 1 hour. So when you look at just fair play, you almost side with the people who went at 6 in the morning. Okay, so you're going to pay these guys a denarius for an hour, then how many should we get because we work 12 hours? We should get 12 denarius. It would just make sense. If that's the going wage, then we should get that much more. But the owner of the vineyard says, can't I do whatever I want to with what belongs to me? Are you jealous? Are you envious? Are you angry because I'm a generous guy? I want to do something nice. I can do whatever I want to. It's my vineyard and it's my money. True? It's true. When we talk about the kingdom, who makes the rules for the kingdom? The king does, right? So our Father gets to decide whatever he wants to decide. When he gives authority to the Son gets to decide whatever he wants to decide. When Jesus passes on authority to the apostles get to decide whatever. But the power, the authority is very centralized. Everybody that's in the kingdom doesn't get to just decide what they think is right. They have to go along with what the king has decided, what he has made to be the rule. Okay? So how does this connect to the last will be first and the first will be last? He says it before he tells the parable. Some who are first will be last, some who are last will be first. And then he ends the parable down in verse 16, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. How does it connect? What does Peter need to know?
Shut up and quit bickering.
Shut up and quit bickering, yeah? It's my choice, right? How did the apostles get to be apostles? Jesus chose them, right? He says in one place, the men that you have given to me. So the Father was involved, the Son was involved. They chose Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Thomas, all those guys. If Jesus didn't choose them, what's their recourse? Nothing, right? They couldn't choose themselves. They couldn't just show up and go, hey, I'm your new apostle. Where do you want me to stand? It was all up to God. It was all up to Jesus. So Peter is in a very special situation, but that very special situation is only there because God decided to give it to him. It was God's choice to do that. Jesus says you're going to receive all kinds of neat stuff for being my apostles, but how do you get that stuff? Only if my Father decides to give it to you, right? You get, and the landowner says, what's fair, right? I'm going to give you what we've decided on, and then there are others who are going to receive what's fair. And it ends up that what's fair is equal to what was agreed upon with the 6 a.m. bunch. So it's not fair, by our viewpoint, to pay a person who works 1 hour the same as you pay somebody that works 12 hours, but the owner gets to decide what's fair. He makes the rules. He makes the payment to the people. I wanted us to look at some possible interpretations. Let's just let you teach for a minute. What kind of interpretations do you come up with for people who bore the heat of the day, who are always in there, worked 6 to 6? Who are those people? Could be the apostles. Okay, apostles compared to other people who come into the kingdom later on, right? So could be just about anybody who was hired at 5 o'clock, but the disciples would be the 6 a.m. people. Any other possibilities?
Good Christians that's been Christian all their life.
Okay.
Oh, and then the last on the cross.
Young Christians, lifelong Christians versus 11th hour Christians. I think the oldest person I have ever baptized was 82. And they were converted by their fiance. I did the baptism and the wedding. So I think they were 82. They didn't live another, 50, 60 years in the kingdom. I lost track of them. I don't have any idea how old they were when they passed. But, somebody that is baptized in their teens, works in the kingdom for 50, 60 years, compared to someone who comes to Jesus at the very close of their day. And both are rewarded. Both receive the same thing. What else? I've got one more on here that I thought of. So I've actually heard it preached this way. That's the reason I came up with this one. Not original with me. How about the Jews? Right? We're spending so much time with Paul in Romans, and we're getting ready to get over into Romans 9 here in a week or two, where he's talking about the Jews who were always God's people, and then the Gentiles come in, right, late in the day. So maybe that long period of time that the Jews were God's special people before any Gentiles really came in to the kingdom, or before they became the predominant part of the kingdom. Maybe it's Jews and Gentiles. But as far as the context, I think we're right to think that we're talking about the apostles. I'm going to reward you. You're going to get the reward that is due to you. But there are going to be some that come later on that are going to receive great rewards too. It's up to me. It's up to my Father to decide what kind of reward that these people are going to get. Look at Hebrews 11. Look at 3 or 4 passages that deal with things about this or around this. Hebrews 11:39. What's Hebrews 11? What does it deal with? Anybody? It's the roll call of the faithful. It starts all the way back with by faith Abel. It goes all the way up through the prophets. And he gets down to verse 39 and says, all these were commended for their faith, but none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us could they be made perfect. So if you're thinking about the Old Testament heroes, how much does David deserve? He deserves the lion's share, right? How much does Abraham deserve? Or Isaac or Jacob or Joseph? How much do they deserve for the work that they did in the heat of the day? But do we get the same reward? How much better can heaven be than heaven? So, are there degrees of heaven? Are there degrees of reward? Hard to say. Let's go over to Revelation 4. Here's some about the apostles themselves. Some interpretive work and some just comes right out and says it. Revelation 4, starting in verse 1. John says, After this I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. The voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, come up here, I will show you what must take place after this. At once I was in the Spirit, and there before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby, and a rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne. Surrounding the throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. Who are these guys, the 24? Most scholars believe this is 12 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, on down through, and the 12 apostles. Now, Sunday morning we were talking about this. It's never the 11. Right? It's always the 12. They're always represented as 12. It's a unit, it's a picture, it's a group. So when you get rid of Judas, so we're 11 for a little while, you bring back in Matthias. Matthias is an apostle. Then Paul becomes an apostle. Barnabas is referred to as an apostle. James, the Lord's brother, gets that title. So how many apostles did we have? We had the 12. They're always, that original group is always known as the 12. Look at Revelation 21 and verse 10. Let's start at 9. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and said to me, come and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. He carried me away in the Spirit to a mountain great and high, showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. It shone with the glory of God, and its brilliance was like that of a very precious jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. It had a great high wall with 12 gates, and with 12 angels at the 12 gates. On the gates were written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. It's always the 12. Which 12? Does Judas have his name on a foundation stone? I doubt it seriously. So maybe the 12 including Matthias? Are the names? Is it important? No, that's not the point. The point is that the 12, right, the apostles, the ones that Jesus appointed, whoever they were, whatever their names were, their job was to be the foundation. So Jesus tells Peter, you'll have thrones to sit on. So we look at chapter 4, the 12 patriarchs plus the 12 apostles perhaps sitting on 12 thrones. We look over here, you guys are the beginning point. You're the foundation of the thing. So there's a lot to be said that maybe Jesus says, yeah, you're going to get a great reward because you really are doing the heavy lifting to get this thing started. But he always throws it in. The last will be first, and the first will be last. And I think he's aiming that perhaps at Peter, who's wanting to say, where's our reward? How important are we? Along with James and John, who would be saying, can one of us sit on your right? Can the other one sit on your left when you come in your kingdom? You guys are focusing on the wrong things. Look at Ephesians chapter 2. One more. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 19. It's talking about how God has brought all of humanity through Christ into one body. So consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. So in Revelation, you've got apostles that are kind of equated with the patriarchs of the Old Testament. In Ephesians, Paul says it's like the apostles and the prophets. So if you're a Jew, there's nobody more important than the prophets and the patriarchs. And that's as good as your history gets. Those are the most important people in your history. And Jesus says, you apostles, that's the league that you're in. So there's nothing lacking in what Peter is going to receive for being an apostle, but there needs to be care taken that, the last will be first and the first will be last. All right. Another one. We've got time and nobody smells it anyway. Luke 14.
Nobody smells
What
it.
did you say?
Luke 14.
Luke 14.
No, that wasn't what I was talking about. I heard that.
We're going to start in verse 7. Now this one is not a vineyard parable. And he doesn't start it with, now the kingdom of heaven is like. We run into those kingdom parables. You don't have to guess on those. But this one is neither of those. He's at the house of a Pharisee, and he's being watched. There's a man who has a withered hand. He had, some translations say that he had a deformed hand. One said that his hand was engorged or swollen. Anyway, Jesus heals the man's hand, and it's a Sabbath. So he says, if you had a kid, one of your kids or your donkey fell into a well on the Sabbath, would you pull them out? And I always thought, well, those are not exactly equal, but
I'd say which kid?
which kid? So it's in that area, it's in that context that he brings this up. When he noticed how the guests picked their place of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you, will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you're invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So there's your last will be first, first will be last part. Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So we have another passage that has to do with, what do I get paid? What's the reward for living a particular lifestyle? But this is a little more general, a little more universal than the other one. This parable bothers me a little bit because I know people who are on both ends of this thing. I know people who will immediately go in if there's a special event and sit down at the head table, assuming that's where they're supposed to be. I've witnessed once or twice somebody having to go up and say, look, you see the nameplate here? You know, this is where Dr. Blue Blood is going to sit. That's not your spot. You go sit over there. Well, by the time that you sort that out, you're not sitting in the first 2 or 3 tables. Everybody else has already come in and sat down. So you're in the back of the room. So I've known some guys who have run into that problem. But I also know some people who will sit at the back of the room and wait. They're passive aggressive. And they're going to sit back there and wait till somebody comes and gets them. And when somebody doesn't come and get them, they're going to pout. Because they believe that their true place is up there at the head table. And they're going to sit and wait till somebody acknowledges that their real place is the head table. So they'll just passively aggressively sit in the back and wait for somebody to come get them and then celebrate their victory of being better than everybody else. That's not what Jesus is trying to picture here. He's trying to picture an attitude that does not put self first. So the point is not ending up at the head table. The point is not putting yourself in that position and thinking that you're better than everybody and deserve to be at the head table. He says, and if they come and get you, then great. You know, just if somebody else's opinion of you is high, that's wonderful. If your own opinion of you is high, it may be suspect. Right? So let somebody else sing your praises. Don't sing your own. So it's a very usable parable. It's, you know, again, universal. Lots of folks could learn from this. If you go to a meal, sit in a normal place, and then maybe somebody will come get you and move you. How often are we in that situation? Not much anymore, right? Our culture doesn't do this very often. It has to be something kind of special going on. I've only had to sit like at a head table once or twice. Like, you know, somebody got Citizen of the Year and they wanted me to say something about them. One of my elders was Citizen of the Year one time in Franklin. Well, would you say a few words? Yeah, so I got to sit up front. It's a problem for me to sit up front because I'd rather sit with Becky. And they don't usually bring your wife and put her up there too. So, you know, I'd rather sit in the back and when it's my turn, just walk up and say something. But once or twice I've been in situations where we had those. Graduation ceremonies, when you have to go sit up front on the stage because you're going to say something, you know, it's a little tougher to sit in the back and walk all the way up and go do that. But we don't do it much in our culture. Don't have a lot of things where there's what do you call it, a dais, where there's the front table? Dais? See, we don't even know what it's called.
I know how to spell it.
Yeah, the front table, the head table. Right. Then he shifts it just a little bit. And he says something very similar to what he says in the Sermon on the Mount, when he talks about only loving the people that love you. Here he says, when you throw a party, you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't just invite your friends or your brothers or your sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbors. Invite people that can't afford to be at your luncheon. Invite people that are in need, because they're never going to be able to pay you back. And the way that the NIV words it may be exactly right. When you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, although they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So again, is the point to invite them so you can get blessed, or are we inviting them because we want to honor them? Or maybe both. But again, we can take what he says and twist it till it's all about us. Right? I'll sit in the back so somebody will prove that I'm the best and they'll come get me and take me to the front. I'll invite the poor people to come to my banquet because that way I know I'll get a reward when I get to heaven. So you can take what Jesus says and twist it a little bit and come up with something that's not as pure. might be doing the right thing, but for the wrong reasons, but not as pure as the motivations that Jesus was looking for. Verse 11, all those who exalt themselves will be humbled. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. James has a famous passage in his letter, humble yourself in the sight of God, and he will lift you up. So again, if we remember who the king is, that's a long way toward being in the right direction. Just know that there's only one God and it's not us. That moves us in a hurry in the right direction. Thoughts, comments about any of this? Okay. Tell you guys bye.